This is going to be the third video about rational exponents. And what I want to do is take the basic rule that we had for converting from radical expressions to rational exponents and back again. So let's start with these. Okay, so here I've got a to the 1/2, and I want to convert that. My instructions are to convert that to a radical expression. Okay, so we know that we're going to have a radical sign, and the index is going to be 2. In other words, we're going to have a square root, and we can write that 2 or not. That's optional. And then underneath the radical sign, we're going to have an a, and that's an a to the first power since the numerator of my exponent is a 1. And like I said, if we want to, we can skip the index, the 2, since the radical sign basically without an index means square root. And we don't have to have the exponent of 1. So we can just write that that equals the square root of a. Okay, so here I've got something that's kind of similar. It's a to the 1/4. And the only difference in approaching this is that since the denominator of my exponent is 4, I've got to put the 4 in as my index. And then so it's going to be the 4th root of a, and I can call that a to the first, or I can leave that little 1 exponent out. Okay, now this is where it gets a little tricky. Here I've got 2a to the 1/4. What you have to remember here is the only thing that I'm raising to the 1/4 power is the a. So in other words, this is 2 times, you can think of it this way, a to the 1/4. So whatever a to the 1/4 is, I'm going to multiply that by 2. Which means I'm going to start out with a 2 outside of the radical sign. And then I want a to the 1/4, which I actually just did right up here. So that's going to be 2 times the 4th root of a. Now compare that with this next one, 2a. 2a is in parentheses, raised to the 1/4. Well, that means that the 2a is going to go under the radical sign. And I'm going to take the 4th root of it. So I'm going to have my radical sign. My index is 4. And under the radical sign, I'll write a 2a. And I could put parentheses around the 2a and a little 1 exponent, but that's really unnecessary. Okay? And another variation on this. Here I've got 2a squared. That whole thing is in parentheses. And that's raised to the 1/4 power. So I'm going to put in my radical sign. Since I'm raising this whole thing to the 1/4 power, I'm going to have a 4th root. And then underneath the radical sign, I'll have everything that was raised to the 4th power, which is 2a squared. Okay? Make sure these make sense to you. And now we're going to do a whole bunch of examples going back in the other direction, going from rational exponents to radical signs. Okay, so let's start out with the 5th root of x. Okay, so that's the same as saying x to the 1st. And my rule says take the base that's underneath your radical sign and make that the base of your exponent, or the base for your exponent. And then take the index, which is 5 in this case, because we're taking the 5th root. Make that the denominator of the exponent. And take the exponent that's underneath the radical sign, if you have one. If you haven't got one, you just add a 1. And make that the numerator of the exponent. Okay? Let's use that same rule, and we'll do 5 times the square root of x squared. Or, excuse me, the 5th root of x squared. Okay, so I'm going to take this x, bring it out from under the radical sign. I'm going to have a rational exponent, a fraction exponent. The denominator is going to be 5, and the numerator is going to be 2. Okay, here's where we have to be careful. I've got the 5th root of 3x. Okay, so what's underneath the radical sign is a 3x. Now, when you see that 3x, it might be good to think of it as 3x in parentheses raised to the first power. Think of that as being under the radical sign, which means we want to take that 3x, put it in parentheses outside of the radical sign, and then my exponent is going to be 1 over 5. I've taken the index as the denominator for the exponent. I've taken the 1, which is what 3x is raised to, and made that the numerator of the exponent. Okay, getting a little more complicated. Here I have the fifth root of 3x squared, and it's only the x which is squared. So what I'm going to do, since that square does not apply to the entire radicand, I'm going to put the radicand in parentheses and raise it to the first power. Okay, which really doesn't change anything. But now I can take the rule and just say, okay, 3x squared, that was all in parentheses, and it's raised to the 1/5 power. The next example looks pretty much the same, except now the 3x is in parentheses. I've got the fifth root of 3x, and it's all of 3x, which is squared. Well, that's fine. I'm going to take what's in parentheses, bring it outside of the radical sign, and leave the parentheses. My fractional exponent, my rational exponent, is going to be 2/5. Okay, and for the last one on this page, I've got 2 times the fifth root of 3x squared. All that means is, whatever the fifth root of 3x squared is, I'm going to multiply it by 2. So I'm going to take this 2, then I'm going to put parentheses. Now the 3x squared, the only thing I'm squaring is the x. So let's put parentheses around 3x squared as the radicand and raise it to the first power. So now I'll take that 3x squared out, and my exponent for 3x squared is going to be 1 over 5. Okay? Take a little time and review these also. I'm going to do another, hopefully, short video just to show you some of the some more kind of complicated problems. But you know, the thing about these to remember is all you're doing is taking the basic rule and being very careful. You're watching out for parentheses, you're watching out for whether an exponent applies to everything inside parentheses or just to a number or a variable. And as long as you're careful about that, you'll be fine. Okay, stick around, I'll do one more video. See you soon.